let's talk for a moment, if we could, about documenting and reporting progress.
You know, one of the things about the IEP is after we have the goal statement, we also are required now to talk with the parent about how often we're going to document progress. A lot of times I think it's easy to just say, okay, we'll document progress 4 times a year because that's what they do in the general classroom when they send out report cards. But I think we need to also be setting some milestones. Where do we really want to be as we go along the way within that year? And it might be 4 times of the year, but we need to stop and think about how are we going to document progress and what are we going to expect to see. So we want to consider how the expected progress is going to be determined, first of all. If we've, again, done good job with our present levels, maybe we're using a curriculum-based measurement and we have already established a baseline. So we're going to look at our goal statement and we're saying, we're going to use reading fluency is the easiest one that comes to mind. We're going to be doing reading trials every week and we're going to be documenting them on a chart. That's easy enough to do. So that's our way in which how we're going to measure our progress or determine if progress is being made. We also want to look at, again, the rate of growth that's expected from the initiation of the IEP until we can say we've achieved the goal. And so if we have a chart and we say this is where the student is now, this is where we want the student to be in a year's time, then we might just kind of plot along that a line where we would expect the student to be at each quarter. That could be another way of easily doing that. And we could then talk with the parent and say, this is kind of what our target is for the first quarter, our target for the second, etc. We also, though, need to be talking with parents and the IEP team is, what are we going to do if we're not seeing progress? Do we need to call a whole IEP team again? Or if we've talked about it thoroughly at the IEP meeting with the parent, maybe we only need to pick up the phone and say, we talked about this at our IEP meeting. Johnny isn't making the progress that we expected, so we want to make a modification in the program, and this is the modification that we're going to be making. If we've forewarned the family that this might be possible, then it's possible that we can do that only with a phone call. If it's significant, then we might have to call another IEP team meeting. But again, that should be a discussion that occurs at that first IEP team meeting. I want to take a moment here just to talk a little bit about formative assessment or progress monitoring. There's a lot of talk today in schools about progress monitoring because we have a lot of conversation about response to intervention. And it's a very effective tool for special education teachers. It's a very effective tool for communicating with parents about progress on the IEP and for documenting progress. In some places they call it formative assessment, and in other places they call it progress monitoring. But it's a process that involves frequent, ongoing, systematic monitoring of performance. And this is really important because we don't want to wait until 2 months down the road to find out that we're not making progress if we can know that within a month's time. So frequent, ongoing, systematic monitoring. It occurs in core, supplemental, and intensive instruction. So in the case of special education, that's probably considered more intensive instruction. But it might be that we're also progress monitoring on a goal that's in the general classroom. So that would be considered more of a core instructional process. So we can do progress monitoring in any instructional setting. It answers whether or not the student is making progress compared to the self, progress compared to peers, and progress compared to a standard that we have set ahead of time. And it answers the question of whether or not the instructional adjustments are needed.
This next section reminds me of one of my favorite quotes, Carol. I believe it's credited to Will Rogers, who said, "Even if you are on the right track, you're still going to get run over if you don't keep moving."
That's quite true. But the first question is, are we on track?
Mhm.
You know, and I think that the progress monitoring, again, helps us make sure we're on track. And if we're ahead of the game, if we're making more progress, then we should speed it up. Because, as you said, just being on the right track doesn't mean we won't get run over, but because we want to keep students progressing. So it helps us to ask the question, is the student making progress at the expected rate? If yes, we want to continue. If no, we might need to adjust. If the student is progressing at a rate higher than expected, then maybe yes, adjust the intervention. Maybe it's time to move the student out of this intense intervention, to discontinue. Or maybe it's to try it for a little bit longer to see if that rate continues. Of course, if the student is progressing more slowly, then we need to come back and ask, do we need to make an adjustment in the frequency or the intensity of the instruction? Or is there a requirement, or is this an indication of a need for a different kind of instruction or a different strategy?
Great, and thank you, Carol. That was important information. And now we'll move on to the next section.